I think if the power grid shut down, it would obviously get pretty dark. Okay, so if we're talking mass failure on a national level, some of the first things that we're gonna notice as a society, other than the fact that we can't binge watch Netflix, is a major negative effect on both health and finance. If the power grid were to shut down, many of the electrical devices in hospitals keeping people alive would certainly shut down soon after. Before you run to the comments, yes, I am well aware that any hospital worth its salt would come with a backup generator, but the thing is, the majority of these generators aren't equipped to keep an entire hospital running, let alone for an extended period of time. And with the amount of people who suffer injuries during a blackout, I have a feeling those generators would stop generating pretty dang fast. Along with this, we would see a major crash and burn in the stock market, an industry in which millions of dollars can be made and lost within fractions of a second. An industry in which 58% of the American people and 1 in 3 Canadians have entrusted their financial security to. I think it's safe to say that in the case of health and finance, no power equals no good. Next up, so the grid shuts down and the fate of humanity is up in the air. Where do we go from here? And who do we call? What's the data on this kind of thing? Well, you might not like this, but if the power grid were to go down, navigation is going down with it. No more GPS, so for the younger generation out there, you might want to brush up on your map reading skills a little bit. I will join you. Maybe you want to call someone to help? Well, too bad, you can't. It's total grid shutdown. Come on, do you really think your cell phone is going to be working right now? Please, don't be ridiculous. While yes, there are backup generators attached to cell phone towers, much like hospitals, and they might be of service during a regular blackout, but in the event of a national power grid failure, those things are going to be running on empty pretty soon. As for your data, customer data, important data, there's a major risk of that being lost as well, and you're probably wondering how that's possible. Well, when the power goes out in physical data centers, where the majority of our data is stored, it's a recipe for potential loss, and even if power eventually comes back on, we might never get that back. And if it doesn't, well, you're SOL, my friend. Is it hot in here? Or is there just no AC? Or maybe it's cold in here and there's just no heater. Neither, I suppose. Oh, and how's the ice in your fridge looking? Oh, it melted? Yeah, forget comfortable temperatures and say food storage. When the power goes out, all of that goes out the window. Duh. In 2021, during a blackout caused by a heat wave, 2 people actually died of hyperthermia, which is when the body reaches unsustainably high temperatures due to prolonged exposure to extreme heat. Not a nice way to go. On the flip side, in Canada alone, 1,670 deaths occur per year by hypothermia, which is when the body reaches unsustainably low temperatures. I have a feeling, no, not a feeling, I know that these numbers would more than significantly increase should we experience a widespread power grid failure for a prolonged amount of time. As for your refrigerator, it doesn't work, and whatever meats or cheeses or whatever else you have stored in there are soon gonna start to spoil. And you can't get more because stores have shut down and transport trucks aren't running. And eventually, rotting and spoiled food and drinks will be piling up in the streets, which sounds horrific and disgusting, and I'm sure wouldn't smell good either. Super gross. So, we've got no heat, no cooling, food is piling up. I'm sure everyone is keeping their cool, right? I mean, no. Obviously not. People are panicking on a mass scale, and the longer the blackout continues, the worse it's gonna get. We would likely see a rise in self-inflicted harm resulting in either serious injury or death, along with an increase in harm to others. Crime would increase, as we have already witnessed in previous cases of power loss. More violent crime takes place in poorly lit areas. It's like basic math. Especially sidewalks with no working street lamps. So my advice to you, don't be walking around in the dark during a mass power outage, and especially don't be doing it alone. Theft would also increase due to the fact that security cameras are down, and basically there would be a whole lot of rotting food, looting, and dying. I don't even want to think about the fact that there is almost no chance proper burials are taking place at this time, and there would probably be a pileup of bodies in the street, along with that food that we talked about earlier. Didn't want to think about it, I thought about it, so there you go. As we reach our halfway point, I would just like to take a moment and acknowledge those of you who have smart homes and drive electric cars, because you're screwed. Hopefully you haven't gone so far as to replace your locks with fully electrical ones, because you'll definitely want them in full working order when the sun goes down and it's time to seek shelter. Not only that, but if you're planning on relocating, you've probably got max 300 miles before you need to recharge that electric car of yours too. Oh, but you can't recharge it, can you? Because the power's down. Come on, guys. So, those of you with gas cars and old homes and low floors are probably feeling pretty good right now. Oh yeah, for those living in penthouses, enjoy that dark stairwell. Anyways, back to the gas cars. Feeling good? Don't. I hate to break it to you, but everyone suffers when the grid goes down, not just those with electrical enjoyments. Every second the power is out, gas becomes more and more valuable until people are fighting for it, killing for it, and trading an arm and a leg for it. So if you don't feel like bartering, don't bother planning any trips. Besides, your car probably got stolen anyways. Alright, so quick recap. We're out of money, we're running low on food, we're either freezing cold or boiling hot, but what's happening to our military? Well, considering 99% of the military actually depends on the civilian electrical grid, as well as our food and water infrastructure, which we know has crumbled, they would most likely just be as screwed as us. And if the military is starving and scavenging for resources, I have a feeling other countries might just see that as the perfect opportunity to swoop in and attempt to take over. Mind you, there's no power, so they would have to rely on navigation systems that do not run on electricity, such as compasses and maps, and pray that they land in the day, because landing in unfamiliar terrain at night with no lights, probably not a good idea. On the flip side, I feel as though many allied countries would come to our aid long before that happened, but on the flip side, if they come after an op has already begun invasion, we could be looking down the barrel of another world war, which none of us want. Next, I want to talk about what would happen if the power outage was the result of a massive solar storm. Well, first of all, our satellites would get knocked out, meaning even if we did eventually get our power back, we would still lack cellular communications and wireless navigations, meaning the younger generation might actually get the chance to use a landline. And if you don't know what a landline is, I really don't know what to say to you, honestly. Anyways, during the electrical storm, a number of electronics on Earth would begin to short circuit due to power surging, creating a potentially pretty big fire hazard. What else happens in the event of a solar storm? Well, everyone in space who is not in their spaceship or space base would die almost instantly. They'd be incinerated and burned up. For anyone safe inside their man-made structures, cosmic radiation and charged particles raining from the sun would actually just roll right off the hull of the vessel, kind of like a mild rainstorm. They would be fine for a while, but with satellites down and no power back on Earth, they would also be alone, destined to spend the rest of their days floating in space until they die, most likely of starvation. So, we talked about what would happen if the grid failed as a result of a solar storm, but what if it was the result of a nuclear disaster? You see, when a high energy explosive detonates, like a nuke, it causes what's known as an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. Because the blast of a nuclear weapon is so powerful, the electromagnetic pulse it creates has the power to take down the power grid for months, if not years. We already know how bad things would be if the grid went down, but go ahead and pile a nuke blast on top of it. We would face firestorms, widespread radiation sickness from fallout, and nuclear winter, a period of cold darkness following the blast due to thick layers of smoke and dust stirred up in the atmosphere. It would suck. This, of course, would come after the impact of the explosive, which would create a fireball as hot as the core of the sun and instantly vaporize anyone standing within a specific radius and severely injure and blind others. Not to scare you or anything, it's just really not a good scenario. It's awful. Yeah. Okay. So far we've been talking about the power grid failure on a national scale, but I want to know what would happen if the power grid failed on an international level. Well, in this case, hopefully at least a few allied countries with the right resources would still have power and come to our aid. But what about if the power grid failed on a global level and the entire world all lost electricity at the same time? Well, it wouldn't be good, and I don't think it would be very long before the globe descends into complete and utter chaos. And at what point do you think we'd notice it wasn't just us who lost power? Like, do you think we'd assume we were abandoned, or would we eventually start to catch on? Would we revert back to living off the land? I feel like cities would become absolute ghost towns due to lack of natural resources. Like, without power, there's nothing for us there. And do you think we would all just end up killing each other, or would we maybe be able to find some sort of social reset? And of course, that brings me to my last point, which is social reset. I mean, it seems highly likely without the interference of media or finances, and without basic amenities and entertainment, society would deteriorate quite quickly. We know our strengths. Living without these is not one of them. People with weaker bodies and minds would most likely die within a year, if not months. And those with stronger bodies and minds who managed to survive would be changed forever. And even if power does come back on years later, would they want to go back to that life? I'm not sure. Of course, let me know what you think, but I personally think that the surviving society at that point would be ready for something new. Exactly what, I'm not exactly sure, but I'd like to think that it would be something positive, rooted in humanity and sustainability, but there's also a possibility that it will become just one big fight to the death until the end of days. But whatever the outcome would be, I think I'd rather not find out, and I think we're on the same page. I am really curious to hear your theories though, guys, so let me know in the comments, and whichever one is the most realistic or terrifying or cool, I'm gonna give a shout out in my next video. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed it. I've been your host, Hannah Thompson, and I will see you next time.